Okay, so the executive order is very timely. When's that going to happen?
Well, we're going to introduce our bill when I get back in town tomorrow. And our concern is that the president doesn't have the prerogative to write legislation. And our founding fathers were very concerned with this. Our founding fathers were great fans of Montesquieu, and Montesquieu said there can be no liberty if you combine the executive and the legislative authority together. So really they separated it so we would have checks and balances. And we want to make sure that the president's aware of this, and if he doesn't listen to the legislation, I think there's also an avenue through court. There are now some news reports of others exploring legal action on this. One of the great ironies is that about the only good part of Obamacare is that it says your doctor cannot be forced to divulge information on guns you have in your house. He's now overturning that legislation with one of these executive orders. So I think there's a real chance that he is actually trying to create legislation, which he shouldn't be allowed to do.
Well, and so if the EOs only kind of go as far as the executive branch, and I understand you put the Obamacare thing in there because we have a nullify route here in South Carolina as well, at least when it comes to Obamacare, is it kind of a symbolic move? It's the same question I ask politicians here in South Carolina.
Well, it will be tough for me because I'm in the minority. The Democrats control legislation, and I'm guessing they're not going to be jumping up and down to let me have this bit of legislation. That's why I also mentioned the court. The Democrats don't control the court process. In 1997, one of Clinton's executive orders was overturned. Clinton had an edict, and he said no government businesses will deal with any business that hires replacement workers on a strike. And this was basically legislation that he was unable to get through Congress. He basically did by executive fiat. And so there is precedent for the court striking down executive orders, and we'll see. That's why we're looking at it, having our lawyers read it, and trying to determine whether we go forward.
Let's talk about 2016. Differentiate yourself from your dad. I had the pleasure of interviewing your dad during the primaries here, literally almost a year ago to date.
Well, I think every individual's different, and you know, I've been in the Senate 2 years. I think people have to judge me on who I am because I can't spend my whole life trying to distinguish and differentiate. So people have to get to know who I am, and that's one of the reasons for traveling and getting to know people. And I think you'll find that I'm a strong believer in limited government, constitutional government. I do believe that our foreign policy should include a strong national defense. I think it's the primary thing we do, but I think it also doesn't mean that we have to be involved with every civil war around the world.
Yeah, so a classic libertarian, would you define yourself as?
You know, I would say constitutional conservative is a good way to describe me.
Your dad did get hammered, nailed on foreign policy, but fiscally, I even asked him, listen, if this doesn't work out in your favor, will you be a part of someone's cabinet? On the financial side, he said, no, I don't think so. But do you follow his footsteps fiscally?
I think what you'll find is that what the Republican Party does need is something a little bit different. You know, what we've been trying doesn't seem to be working. We've lost 2 elections in a row. We don't seem to be competitive in California, New England, around the Great Lakes. So I think we do need somebody that approaches things a little bit differently. One of the things that I think distinguishes me as a Republican is that I don't think it's a good idea to send money to countries that are burning our flag. I don't think it's a good idea to send money to countries that are chanting death to America. So I think we've got enough problems at home without sending foreign aid to foreign countries. Unfortunately, many Republicans and many Democrats disagree with me on this, but you will hear me talk about that quite a bit as time goes on.
What would be the message to non-traditionals? I mean, you said you got to do something. The GOP's got to do something differently. Clearly,
I think number one, we need to have candidates that aren't chanting "bomb somebody" every moment they speak, who don't think that, well, I'll bomb them more than you will is basically the Republican message. I think young people are very conscious because young people have to fight the wars. Even our soldiers are very conscious of this, that they serve their country, they do as they're asked. But I talk to soldiers leaving from Fort Campbell, from Fort Knox, and they tell me that they're not excited about their 4th and 5th tour. They're not excited about training soldiers who, when they turn around, may well shoot them in the back in Afghanistan. So I think there is, even among our soldiers, some weariness of war. I think those are issues that appeal to people across the political spectrum. I think young people don't want to hear the message that if they should use drugs or make a mistake and get involved in drugs, that they are locked away for life. And I think too often Republicans have been in favor of long prison sentences, where I think that drugs are not an advantage to our youth, but I'm not for locking kids up for long periods of time if they make mistakes.
How do you, how do you convince them it's not the rich old white guy club? You know, conservative has become a bad word with, young independents, I would say. I mean, they're running away from, the Republican Party now, it seems like in droves, because not, just like liberals a bad word, now conservatives.
I think Republicans need to show up and do a better job with ethnic groups. For example, African Americans, we're getting 4% of the African American vote on a good day. And yet, if you look at the history of the Republican Party, we're the party of emancipation, we're the party of abolition, we're the party that elected the first 20 U.S. congressmen that were African American were Republican. 4 out of 7 African American senators have been Republican. Tim Scott from your state here, we have all kinds of history where we have been the ones who were for voting rights, civil rights, for overturning the Jim Crow laws. This is the history of the Republican Party, and I think we need to remind people of it. With regard to the Hispanic vote, we need to tell immigrants that we see immigrants as an asset, not a liability, that we're not in favor of rounding up immigrants and sending them back anywhere, that if you want to work in our country, that we're going to find a place for you.
I asked about the classic libertarian, thinking about your dad there. I mean, it seemed to be the most loyal and determined group, really. I mean, to anyone in the past election. How do you capitalize on all the folks that voted for your dad?
Well, I think what you'll find is that if someone has the message that attracts libertarian Republicans and also traditional conservative Republicans, if you can find a happy medium between the two that fuses both libertarianism and conservatism, I think you'll find that you have a majority.
This is a doozy. How do you think you could balance the budget if you were elected in 2016? Do you think you could do it in your first term, and if it were, it'd probably be your only term if you were actually able to do it?
I disagree. I think the people and the markets would respond in such a way that there'd be a huge market rally. I think the economy would respond to this, and it's not that hard. You cut 1 penny out of every dollar for 6 years in the budget balances. 1 penny out of every dollar. The problem is government is designated to grow by about 7% every year. So whenever they talk about cuts in the trillions or sequester and this and that, they're always talking about cuts in the rate of growth. I'm talking about a real 1% cut. If you did a 1% cut, what American family hasn't had to deal with a 1% cut in their family budget or in their business's budget? 1% is very doable. And if government can't do it, I think we need to do it. The repercussions of borrowing $50,000 every second are going to catch up to us, and they're going to be devastating.
Wow. How do you get the why bothers off the couch? I actually talked to a guy yesterday at the gun range who he voted Republican last time around. It didn't work out in your favor, and he just said, why bother? And he didn't even get off the couch this election.
Well, one of the things I'm going to be talking a lot about over the next several years is going to be term limits. I think that many in government have become arrogant and presumptuous on both sides of the aisle. And so what you'll hear coming from me is that government really needs to be reformed, and one way is to send people home. Let's have some rotation in office. There's no monopoly on knowledge in Washington. I've been there long enough to know that these people do not have all the answers, and I think some new blood would help.
Yeah, and that would possibly be you with a run in 2016.
We'll see.
The last question I want to ask you is about the whole divide and conquer. How do you fight the race baiting and taxes, guns? I mean, all the hot topics. I mean, the left clearly knows how to fight.
Well, I think that ultimately most of Americans, when you get down to it, really are people who I think agree with what the Republican Party has always stood for. I don't think most people want to overturn the Second Amendment. I think most people do believe that we do have a right to keep and bear arms. Even the other side kind of acknowledges that. While they're trying to grab and control your guns, they are acknowledging the Second Amendment is still a part of the Constitution. But I think these things are popular. I think it would be popular to people if they knew that the Republican Party was offering them an opportunity to get a job, not just a bauble or a trinket. Here, we want you to stay poor, but here's a gift, so you'll vote for us.
A cell phone?
Yeah, I think that most people, I've had members of my family who've been unemployed and on unemployment. They're not bad people. There's nothing wrong with being someone who's needed help on occasion, But what Republicans need to offer is that we are the party of opportunity. We're the party that will create a job, that will give you back your self-esteem, that will give you your self-worth. And anybody who's ever had a job, whether you're a teenager working in the hot sun, digging plants, putting roofs on buildings, no matter what you're doing, there's a sense of respect and feeling of worth that you get from having a job. I think everybody wants that, whether you've been somebody who's been on assistance or not. I think most people would love to join the middle class. If we were the party that opens the door to the middle class for people, I think we would change the dynamic of what's going on in this country.
We got people talking about flying the flag upside down today, Inauguration Day, because we're literally in, under duress.
I don't think that's useful. The president, for all his faults, and I can list many of his faults, and many of my disagreements with him on policy, I don't think he's a bad person, or that we as a country, because one party won versus another, should say that things are finished. I am concerned about how much debt we're accumulating, but that debt's been accumulated under Republicans and Democrats, and the problem is that there's a little bit in all of us that like Santa Claus and like something for free. What we have to let people know is that nothing's free. When you get something that appears to be free, there is a cost, and that cost is rising prices. It's $5 gas at the pump. It's rising milk prices, rising food prices. All of those prices are because your dollar shrinks, because you're just simply printing up money to pay for these gifts that they tell you are free, but in the end they end up hurting precisely the people they say they're helping.
But that's happening now, and the message, and look, we
need to articulate our message better. It's always easier to be in favor of Santa Claus. It's a little harder to be in favor of opportunity. But I think most people really, if they thought it through, would choose opportunity over a cell phone.
I guess we'll see. Anything else? Final thoughts?
Thanks for coming by.
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully we can get a cheesy photo if you don't mind.